Hello and welcome back around the Bonfire. It's a pleasure to have you here. It's a little bit of a treat today. We're recording on a Wednesday afternoon. The sun is still out outside. I'm not sitting in my office in the evening. I am joined by Tim, as I always am, because Tim is just kind of perpetually here. But again, Tim, I'm going to skip you because we are so lucky to have a guest with us today. We have Ben Wright of 615 Soccer joining us today to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire, Nashville SC preview. Ben, how's everything been, man? Wonderful to have you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, doing great. A little bit of a late night last night with the U.S. national team in Nashville. So running on just a few hours of sleep. You might get a slightly more unhinged version of me than normal, which is still going to be very vanilla. But anyway, I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm excited to chat with y'all.
Great content that way.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
We like a little bit of unhinged. Tim has to reel me back in every now and then. So it's good to have you here, man. Appreciate that. Tim, I will now ask how you're doing, how you're feeling on this fine Wednesday.
Good. I did not have to deal with seeing a 4-0 butt kicking of the USMNT in front of myself and then talk to people afterwards about how they feel, which is like always fun when it's a multi-goal loss where it looked like there was never really a chance, which I have no experience with, having covered the Chicago Fire for the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But I'm just assuming. It hasn't come up with me personally. But.
How often do you have to write a recap about a 7-2 loss, say? That would almost never happen, I would imagine, right?
So that happened once, and this, as terrible as that was, it's a 7-2 loss. You know what I mean? Like there's not going to be great analysis from it. So it was fun to write just because it just is like, at that point, you just kind of like throw your arms up and are like, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And go kind of hyperbolic with, yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, cool. We'll do a little bit of news here. Nothing too crazy to report from the midweek. The only notable piece of information we got was that Christopher Kupp sustained an injury in the first half against Japan with the United States U17s. No update on the status right now, but obviously would not expect him to be available this week. And we will hopefully find out more tomorrow as Greg meets with the media. The only other notable piece, Sam Rogers was a full participant, so hopefully we are not starting Omar Gonzalez 2 weeks in a row, though I'm sure Ben and company would have loved to see that, I suppose. We will
USMNT legend, never part of a 4-game losing streak. I don't think he was in those matches back in 2007.
He's old. He's not that old, man. Come on, like let the man live. Okay. We will talk a little bit of USMNT just because we've got Ben with us. You're at the game last night. Would love to, I don't know if you feel almost kind of similarly to the way some Fire fans feel, where it is a little bit like, hey, things would have been pretty good if you kept our guy, huh? Like things can actually get pretty worse over here. But we'd love to hear a little bit of on the ground how things were feeling last night as the U.S. men's national team lost 4-0 to Switzerland in Nashville.
Oh boy, how much time do y'all have? I think we could do this for a few hours. The vibes are bad, like really bad. I mean, they got booed off the field at halftime. Maybe a little bit less loud boos at full time, but I mean, there weren't a ton of people there anyway. I think attendance kind of for U.S. games has been pretty dismal recently. Mm-hmm. But the fans who were there were pretty pissed off, and rightfully so. I mean, that was one of the most embarrassing performances I can remember watching in 20 years of watching this team. Yeah, it's hard to figure out like where you go from here because it was just so bad, and I think kind of feels like the cap on just several years of not even just on the field, but it just feels like U.S. soccer as an entity has kind of just fumbled the bag for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's frustrating. This should be like the biggest kind of moment for this team and this sport in the country, and it feels like everybody. I mean, like you have a wider like reaching discussion, but it feels like everybody's kind of missing the boat here, and it's just a bummer.
Yeah. Like some of the guys, it just looked like from watching the performance on TV, you're like, so you guys remember that you're professional soccer players, like, right? Like you remember that that's what you do for a living because it's not convincingly looking like it through some of these plays.
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, it looked like a team that had hardly played together and that made 9 changes. And yeah, no one was on the same page. The back line was trying to do one thing and midfield was doing something completely different. And neither of them worked out. And I mean, Switzerland, I think, probably are a little bit underrated. They're not like an elite team, but they are a pain in the butt for anybody to play against. Like they make life miserable for the elite teams in the world. So I think it was maybe a bit naive to think that this specifically this group of U.S. players could could do a ton against them. But I also think that this is kind of like, I kind of expected at this point, especially after 2022, that the U.S. would kind of be in a similar like category to a Switzerland that is not going to be like an elite team, but could cause problems. And I think we're miles off of that.
I think to that end, like they kind of were after 2022, right? Like you're kind of in that, top 15-ish ballpark. Switzerland
Totally.
maybe a little close to that 10 mark. And unfortunately, things have fallen down a little bit, right? We'll say it that way.
I mean, they've regressed. We all thought they would like take another step or two forward between 22 and 26, and they've regressed significantly. I think you could say that maybe Christian Pulisic, Anthony Robinson, and maybe Chris Richards have like improved, and everybody else has either stayed the same or got worse, and that's pretty scary.
I guess I hadn't thought about it like that until right when you said it, and it's like, oh God.
Yeah, these guys got to get their club situation changed, and a lot of them did change their club situation, and it didn't really change for the better with a lot of guys. So
Totally.
Here we are.
Yep.
Yeah. But some people might say, man, if you had just started, I don't know, the third goalkeeper instead of the second goalkeeper, maybe things would have turned a little bit differently. Maybe I would make that argument. I don't know.
Try the youngest guy in the pool when you're kind of running at your C team anyways. Just see what he's got for you. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know. I think you mentioned kind of keeping our guy and Berhalter and everything, and I think he's a really good manager. I think probably it was time for him to go. I'm not like a huge fan of 2-cycle coaches anyway, but I do think it is hilarious that a lot of the kind of vocal anti-MLS crowd kind of got their wish, and they got an elite manager, which I think Pochettino is a really good manager. But also, like, I think it shows that the problems with this team are so much deeper than just the manager. And I think the real player pool and even culture issues that I don't think one manager is going to fix.
Yeah, maybe even BJ Callahan, which I've seen a lot of BJ Callahan memes around the internet between last night and this morning, including one, just a picture of him. I'm not the step coach. I'm the coach who stepped up, which I thought was semi-clever.
He was hanging out with them when I ran into him at the training facility, I guess, Monday before the game. So he was definitely hanging out with the players.
Yeah. I mean, and clearly, well, actually, this is kind of a good segue. We'll talk a little bit of just kind of general Nashville catch up, right? Because there's been, quite a turbulent 12 months for the club, right? After a pretty sustained period of, for lack of a better word, at least from the outside, stability, right? Gary Smith, and please, if I say anything wrong, please correct me, Ben, but Gary Smith bringing the club up from USL, entering MLS, and pretty quickly finding a certain level of success, right? And then last year, if I remember correctly, after a 2-0 win against Toronto, was relieved of his duties, had a bit of a skid. BJ Callahan's brought in kind of to ideally take the next step, right? A little bit of a mixed bag. And now you look at where things are at this year, kind of off to a flying start, 4th in the East, second most goals. They're in a really nice spot, all things considered. Would love to kind of hear from the interior of everything, how BJ's imprint has been felt, because to be candid, when they made that hire, I was on the negative side of it. I was like, I don't know what this guy can do. I don't know what quality he is. And I've been super impressed with what he's done so far.
Yeah, for sure. I think starting with Gary Smith, obviously, I think maybe not the most popular hire when he was announced initially, just because I think he kind of got a bad rap from some of those Colorado teams. They played ugly soccer and had like almost a negative dollar budget. So I think he kind of did the best with what he could there. And I think he did a lot really well in Nashville. I think he gave them a pretty solid foundation. And I mean, you've seen expansion teams come in and struggle pretty heavily. And I think it's to his credit that Nashville were so competitive so early. And I think in a lot of ways, they're still kind of building on the foundation that he set. But at the same time, I mean, he doesn't play a super proactive style. Nashville were pretty reactive at best. I think even I forget who said this recently, but someone I was on a podcast I was listening to just mentioned the new playoff structure and how I think under Gary Smith, Nashville were set up to like potentially be successful in a one-off, just single elimination knockout round match, like they did in their first year. I think 2021. They went to penalties with Philadelphia, and they looked like they could kind of punch above their weight a little bit. But in a more kind of longer stretch or a 3-game series or whatever, when they're so reactive, I think that made it a little bit tough. I think there were questions about youth development. There was no youth development under Gary Smith. And really, I think the 2023 Leagues Cup, when they went to the final, I think it kind of papered over some of the cracks. They were pretty bad in MLS for about a month before that, and then after the Leagues Cup until he was fired in May of last year, they were really bad. I pulled up the numbers from American Soccer Analysis. They had in those 34 games, they had 40 points and 42 expected points, both of which are like in the bottom 8 to 10 in MLS. So I think they weren't performing well. Hani Mukhtar kind of dropped off a cliff. There were just a lot of issues. And so, I mean, he was fired after a win, which you don't see too often, but the writing on the wall kind of had been there for a little while. And it did feel like his time was running out.
Yeah, absolutely. I made a comment to Tim before we started. Like in a lot of ways, I think the clubs kind of mirror each other in a sense, right? Not so much right in history, because obviously Chicago Fire, one of the more established teams in MLS, one of the first expansion sides, Nashville being on the newer end. But there is a sense of kind of rebirth around this 2025 season for both teams. Obviously, Nashville finding a little bit more success there. But I said to Tim before we started, I kind of joked last year, I was like, man, I really wouldn't mind having Gary Smith right now, as we were in the midst of our Frank Klopas dog days, just kind of setting the floor. But it does kind of seem, to your point here, like BJ has kind of found that next gear for them to step into, especially when you talk about a guy like Hani Mukhtar, like Sam Surridge. I mean, obviously, we saw firsthand what they can do a couple weeks ago here when they were in Nashville. So I guess from the outside, like tactically, what are you seeing from BJ that's getting the better side of, or the more MVP level of Hani that we saw, 2-3 years ago, as opposed to in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. I think it was a super small sample size, but when he was in charge of the U.S., I think retrospectively, it looks even better now. I think they played some of the best soccer that we've seen from them in the last several years under Callahan. And like, obviously, competition and opponents and all that come into it. But like, they played really well. And I think I thought that might be kind of an outlier when Nashville hired him, but it's proven to kind of be the baseline. I mean, even before he was hired, I talked to a lot of people around MLS who had worked with him or knew about him, and I didn't hear a bad word about him coming into Nashville. Everybody said he was the most kind of detail-oriented, hardworking guy they knew, like at any kind of coaching level, but that he very clearly knew how he wanted to play and is very good at kind of concisely and clearly and quickly communicating that to players. I think even last year you started to see an improvement with a roster that was built for Gary Smith, which was like a night and day difference in how they wanted to approach it. And I think you already started to see Callahan kind of starting to implement some of how he wanted to play. Hani Mukhtar got better in the second half of 2024, and then they've really just carried that on and elevated that in 2025. I think there's a lot of discourse around Mukhtar that maybe he was washed or past it, and he just turned 30. So like, I think he's still in his prime. He's playing under a coach who values the ball and plays in a more proactive system. Like Hani Mukhtar has been publicly begging to be more proactive for 2 or 3 years. So I think he has a system that fits him. And I also think Mike Jacobs, the GM, deserves a ton of credit. He did a lot of really, really important turnover to this roster, bringing in guys like Eddie Tagseth and Patrick Yazbek, who are kind of the two midfield linchpins. Ahmed Qasim was huge. Jason Palacios, the center back, he's stepped up. In the past, if Walker Zimmerman missed 2 months, Nashville were dead in the water. And I think it's kind of a credit to Mike Jacobs and Jason Palacios and Jack Mayer and those guys. They really didn't miss a beat. I mean, they went on they're unbeaten in 10 matches with Zimmerman missing most of those. And so I think, it just feels like a different era of Nashville, and they're just a more proactive, like, I don't know, maybe even a more modern club at this point.
It's certainly, I mean, it's been like a more attractive brand of football to watch just, from afar, because that's sort of the thing with the hyper-reactive game. Like, it's fun if it's your team and they're winning. But like, I think that what we've seen from like the Red Bulls and like a lot of other examples, like, is as soon as you stop winning, you're like, wait, why was I enjoying this before? Because like, it isn't aesthetically pleasing. It isn't fun to watch. And like, then it feels like you've got nothing the entire game to really hold on to, because like your team doesn't have the ball as much as you want to see of them. And so there's none of those memories of like, oh man, like I could see we were kind of building something there. And like if this had gone off a little bit differently, maybe like that guy, if he'd been able to make that run and whatever those things are, like you can imagine in your head, like it could have been a different result. But when it's all reactive countering football and you're not winning, there's just no joy in it. And I think that kind of just from like what I heard from Nashville fans that I know, like that seemed to be where they were with Gary Smith, is like, it's like the sort of like Cinderella, back into a pumpkin moment of like, oh yeah, that this is it. At the same time, like you pointed out, John, like you said, established a floor. And I think that floor, even just like making the postseason is something that for, Fire fans' perspective, they have just like, that is the ceiling that they've been waiting to smash now for 7 seasons. And so I think that's like, that actually sounds pretty good to us. But at the same time, I think that you would run into the same issues of like, as soon as the results aren't going your way, you're sort of like left with like, well, what is it we've got? And it doesn't feel like a lot, even though there were clearly a lot of good pieces that were still capable of being really productive on that roster.
Yeah, totally. And I think it was I think it was Hani Mukhtar's kind of individual brilliance that made it bearable for fans in a lot of ways, because I mean, he won MVP playing in a pretty reactive, like transition-based approach. And it was really just because I think he's one of the best kind of open field attackers MLS has seen in the last decade. And so when he was on and they had guys who could kind of quickly get him the ball in transition, it was great. And then he kind of hit a dry spell. I mean, there was the Qatari transfer bid and then some other stuff. I think he just recently started talking about it publicly, but his father died kind of in the midst of all that. And I think that impacted him a lot too. And then Dax McCarty left, who was kind of the one guy in midfield who could kind of consistently progress the ball. And so I think it was just a lot of things all at once. So yeah, maybe not in retrospect, I don't think it should have shocked anybody that Nashville struggled. But I think now under Callahan and Mike Jacobs, it's less dependent on Hani, but I think he also kind of flourishes in the system more because everybody kind of creates chances. And it's also the type of system. I mean, even looking back to the Chicago game, I know you guys don't necessarily want to think about it too much, but like Nashville still left chances on the table in that game. And I think that's kind of been the story of their season. Like even when they're scoring goals, they still are creating chances that aren't necessarily getting put away. And so in a lot of ways, it does feel like they still have another level or two to hit because they're scoring goals, but I wouldn't even say they're finishing particularly efficiently compared to what they're creating yet. So yeah, it's just a completely different approach. And I think less individual dependent. And I think it just seems much more sustainable.
Yeah. So one quick question about Hani Mukhtar, just not asking for any particular reason. Do you happen to know if he's close to getting U.S. citizenship?
I think he should be. I know he's married to an American and has been for the past 2 or 3 years. So I think he's probably within a year or two. I mean, he got his green card a while ago, but I know he's also kind of expressed interest in playing. There's always rumors about him potentially playing for Sudan. So I have no idea what he's thinking. Every time he's asked about it, he's kind of he's tried to avoid giving a committal answer either way, and so I think he's still kind of keeping options open.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult for a lot of these guys because if there is an opportunity to play in a major tournament in your life, like that's something that like I obviously never had, and most people that are professional athletes never have, even in top leagues. And if that opportunity comes up, you kind of want to say yes for something that I think is an important part of your identity, even if it may not be the way that you kind of think of yourself in the back of your mind of like, I am this, from this country, or this is my overall identity, because it is a portion. And I get why guys don't want to like close any doors,
and then, like
if they don't have to.
And also too, like there was more than kind of passing interest from Germany before the 2022 World Cup when he was kind of at that MVP level. They more than kicked the tires on potentially getting a look at him, which obviously didn't pan out. But like that would have been a massive thing for him, obviously, but just kind of MLS as a whole. So I don't know if he's even kind of keeping that option open. I think it would take something pretty insane at this point. But yeah, I'm not 100%. I haven't really asked around about that. But
I was just joking about it, just
as far as
the struggles that there's always
sure.
this forward, that's the striker that's promised, and then the striker that's promised never turns out to be the striker that actually scores the goals, which almost makes you wonder if it's not the striker's fault. But
the real solution is just to naturalize Ricky Pooch.
I mean, yeah.
Guys, well, hold on. We're talking about a striker here. You're pretending that the top scorer in League One last year wasn't an American. Okay, shout out Charlie Kellman. What? Come on, focus up here, guys. Are we not paying attention to the other leagues in the world?
John is slowly on a mission to turn this into a lower league English soccer pod, and we're fighting a battle, but he's slowly gaining inch by inch, and I'm just afraid of where this is going to go at some point.
I just like to shout out my guys. That's all I like to do. Shout out Charlie Kellman. Hopefully he brings a pretty penny this summer. But anyway, we'll keep on moving here. I won't keep jabbing about things nobody else cares about. But moving on, we'll talk a little bit about the Fire. Just kind of love to have an outside perspective while we're here so we can talk a little both sides and then talk a little bit of game. Tough 2024. Great start to 25. We were actually lucky enough to have David Goss on the pod a few weeks ago to talk the new stadium that's opening in 2028. Chicago will finally be joining the soccer-specific stadium ranks of MLS. No longer be playing in a giant bowl on the lakefront.
Again, for the second time.
Yeah,
they'll
but
be joining. They'll be the second in the club that the Columbus Crew are a member of like, oh, you guys built one soccer stadium? Well, we built two.
Yeah, we're so good.
Don't take too hard of a look at the first one, but it's there.
Yeah. Pretend that one didn't happen. We just have this one now, actually. But yeah, and so Ben, I know we mentioned 615 Soccer before. You've also done some work with Backheeled, with Gimme Sport. Would kind of love to hear, kind of from the outside perspective, this turnaround from Berhalter and Co. and what that's looked like.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's some things that I kind of expected with this Fire team, and some things that have surprised me. I think in the past that you've seen kind of Berhalter starts with a pretty strong defensive foundation. And I expected that to be maybe the first thing that he really kind of tried to nail down. And it feels like that piece still hasn't really come together. It feels like they've been fairly defensively fragile. And that's probably limited their ceiling to this point. But they're also just creating the type of chances that you kind of expect from a Greg Berhalter team. And I think that's why, Kuipers was good last year, but I think he's like kind of feasting this year. And I think really in the past few weeks, they've started to kind of set him up in the ways that you saw his Columbus teams with guys like Giassi Zardes and Ola Kamara, Kai Kamara. So yeah, I think it feels like it's still a work in progress, but it does feel like if he's able to kind of nail down that defensive piece, things are going pretty well in the final third. And so it feels like once they get that completely together, that they should be I don't know if they're going to be a MLS Cup contender this year, but I think they're more than like comfortably a playoff caliber team. And it feels like they're just at the very front end of this project. So, I expect them to be like a top team in the East here for the next several years.
Yeah, I think that's what surprised, I think, all of us that kind of knew Greg's work in MLS from, that era with the Crew and just what he did with the national teams. We thought that defense was going to come first and it was going to take the offense longer to click. And then against the Crew, beginning, it was like flying. And it was mistakes on the other end that I think were all too familiar to Fire fans. If it's like, did somebody disconnect the controller on that center back? Because it's like he just stopped. And I think that it has kicked off, it's kicked up a little bit for the Fire lately. Like that, if you're excusing the Nashville game, which is sort of like, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? But like with that one exception, it's looked more stable, even as I think the personnel haven't always been there and healthy. Like, John mentioned Omar Gonzalez starting in the last one, and at some point when you're going to like the fifth or sixth center back in your depth chart in an MLS team, like you're just kind of like at hope and prayer level.
Right. It happens for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking about clubs, I mentioned the Crew Stadium Club. I think Nashville and the Fire may be the only two, starting a 17-year-old center back or playing a 17-year-old center back named Chris or Christopher Club in MLS this year.
So oddly specific, but
yeah, I can't remember. I don't know if there's any other 17-year-olds that have come through. I don't think that there have been in center back, but I couldn't swear that to the top of my head.
I can't think of any other 17-year-old center backs, like period, right now, who are actively getting minutes.
Yeah, which again,
that is a very common occurrence.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think from like just like a soccer development perspective, right? Because like they are harder to develop in certain ways, and like they're guys that used to benefit from coming up through the college ranks. So it's good to see academies producing them. like we talked about the national team pool, I think it's welcome just to see like more guys in more spots rather than like how does every guy that makes it from MLS to Europe or the US to Europe playing like one of like 2 or 3 positions. So that's kind of welcome to see.
Yeah, and I've been impressed. Like, I feel like he's got a lot of production. I mean, Andrew Gutman has kind of been hit or miss in the past, and I feel like he's having what looks like a career best year so far. I barely left him off my All-Star ballot, and honestly have had like second thoughts about. I feel like I should have probably included him there. He's been awesome. I mean, Jonathan Bamba. I think it was insane that they got him for the price that they did, just because I feel like he's like such a clearly good player, but he's been awesome. I mean, we already talked about Hugo Kuipers, but I feel like he's hitting another level. And then I've been super impressed with Philip Zinkernagel. I just really like the way that he's just so smart, and like he doesn't do a ton of like super flashy stuff, but like the spots he gets into are like so effective. And I feel like you can tell that he's thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead of everybody else, and it just makes it look so easy. And then you go back and watch it again and realize what he actually did, and you're kind of like blown away by how nonchalant it looked.
Yeah, I mean it's really, I can't remember the last time that it looked like the Fire got a deal on a TAM player,
Right.
but this looks like they got a deal on a TAM player, and I think that that's something. It was kind of a head scratcher to a lot of us when it was announced as a 3-year deal for a guy that's 30, because like that's a long commitment to a guy you hadn't seen make the adjustment to MLS, and like it's every year like the thing that Fire fans like kind of have started looking out for is like, all right, who's the guy that we're going to buy out so we can clear some cap space at the beginning of this season, and like to be in a position where like that may not have to be the case in years going forward, I think it's just going to be a welcome change for the team.
Yeah, he's been like probably in my top 5 for best signings this season so far. I've really, really liked him.
This is maybe a little bit off the wall. Can I just really quick ask, Ben, you may not know this, or maybe you do. Were Philip Zinkernagel and Sam Surridge on that Nottingham Forest promotion team together? Or am I making that up?
That is a good question. Let me do a quick Google search.
Because I am just now, because Tim, it's funny, every time we talk
forgot
about,
that he played for Forest.
yeah, I was looking over some Sam Surridge things just now because I was thinking about kind of the interesting, we're talking about like getting the most out of Andrew Gutman. I was like, wow, like Sam Surridge has already almost surpassed his goal total from last year, just super impressive. And was just kind of looking back through that, and I was like, oh, coming from Nottingham Forest, like they were probably there together. Just kind of a fun little tidbit.
It looks like he was there from 21 to 22. Surridge was there from 22 to 23. So it looks like they missed each other by a year.
Yeah. So just missed each other in passing. Yeah. But that's
one of those funny things of just to talk about Philip Zinkernagel, like not expecting him to be the impact that he's been. And you look at a guy who, coming from Bodo Glimt, maybe at the beginning of the year, we had a much different opinion of them than we did after that Conference League run, right? Played at Club Brugge, played at Standard Liège, and now he's here. And guy's been playing at a high level for a long time. So kind of just funny the way it works sometimes, I guess, with the expectations in MLS, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he's been great. And I honestly, like, I don't know what the situation is with the Danish team, but like he feels like a guy who's probably like pushing into the fringe.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly like, I think that he's exceeded expectations. Like I thought he would be a major contributor. I mean, I liked his positional versatility coming in because I think that that's something that the Fire have not had enough of. And I think that there were questions in my mind, like Brian Gutierrez, like he hadn't done the thing that like Diego Luna has been asked to do, which is like take control of the car, and stuff like that. And I think there were questions about whether he would. I think they're still there. And then also just questions of like, is he going to be with the team the entire year? Is he a guy that you're going to move on? And you can try to replace through the transfer market, but like you don't want that transition to be more difficult than it has to be. And having a guy that's already had minutes with the squad that can like do a job, I think is welcome. We kind of saw it for the first time last week against DC in what became a 7-1 victory. But like I just think that it shows, in addition to the stuff that he's done, just the value that he provides to a roster of like, can play across the front three and just give you that extra person so you can bring in someone and they can either slot ahead of him or, in a position next to where you're playing him. And it's still like there's room for both in the 11.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to ask, what do you make of that win against DC? Because I remember, I think it was when the Red Bulls like just wall up the Galaxy. And I think I wrote in a backfield column, like you never want to caveat a team scoring like 6 or 7 goals, but also it's the Galaxy. Like, do you feel any of that with? I mean, I think DC are clearly better than the Galaxy, but they're also, I don't know. Do you have trouble kind of gauging it?
The thing that they were contending for from the beginning of the year was wooden and not silver, and I think that everyone knew that. So yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think that the Fire are the first team in history to have been on both sides of a 7-goal performance in one MLS season, and I think one of only 3 teams in MLS history that have been on both in their histories. So
that's wild.
Yeah, Kansas City is the other one. I can't remember if Philly's done it or not. I had this in front of me at some point, but it's been a while since I looked it up on Saturday. But I think that the reaction is both of like, maybe this is like a knock on wood moment for Fire fans with, the game that we're about to talk about coming up, but you just have to discount a lot of things when there's a 7-goal performance either way, right? Because like, it's not going to happen again in the course of the season. Like, I don't think Nashville
unless you're Philadelphia.
Yeah. But like, it's, and I think that you just have to say like, this is something where like every bounce went in, like it was nowhere close to the Fire's best performance of the year offensively. I think if you look at it statistically, like that's kind of the case. Like they looked a lot better against Charlotte, who obviously are a team that I think maybe aren't as good as I think a lot of us thought they were before the season started, but are, I think, still clearly a few steps above DC in a lot of ways and could still push themselves, easily push themselves into like, playoff spot rather than play-in spot where they are right now, and like maybe try to push their way a little bit higher, although the East is just so crowded this year. And so the fact that they were able to do that, I think you take more away from that performance. And this is just like, it's fun seeing guys score 7 goals. It was fun seeing Tom Barlow, who, last year it took him forever to get that first goal coming in. There were comments from Fire fans about like, why did you take Kuipers out? Why did you put him in when you did the goal and result when like Kuipers is like just dead out there in like the 80th minute or whatever? It's like you didn't have an opportunity to like rejuvenate Hugo Kuipers in the 81st minute. Sorry, guys. And Chris Brady actually like literally like grabbed me by the elbow as we were walking past him in the locker room, kind of like done for the night, and stopped to like chat up what Barlow is like in training, how hard he tries in training, and just the work that he does of like being a good teammate as well.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it was awesome to see. And like, I think says a lot about the maturity that Chris Brady, who was then I think 20 years old, has. But I think it also says a lot about like who Tom Barlow is, and like what he brings to the squad. And so, it was good seeing him get a hat trick. I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams had Tom Barlow scoring a hat trick with Chicago Fire before Hugo Kuipers. But I mean, hey, like now we've got something for you've got to try to live up to, which
it's also just a great trivia answer.
Yeah. Oh, it's yeah. Yeah, it's and it's kind of funny because the last time that he scored multiple goals in a game was he scored a brace against Montreal when Thierry Henry was coaching the team in 2020 before the COVID shutdown. So it's like interesting, just kind of like random Tom Barlow showing up where you don't necessarily expect him to moments, which is kind of cool. So yeah, like I think that you take that it's fun. You take that DC is not a good team. I mean, the Fire, I think the thing to look at it tactically that is worth talking about is like they were building out of the back still. But they weren't really being possession dependent because they knew that as high as DC was going to press, if they sat back, recovered, and then could get the balls off, there would be plenty of space behind. Like that was the plan going in, Berhalter told us. And I mean, it worked. And like that, he said Tom Barlow's job was to like find that space that they were going to leave in behind. And he clearly did. And like all 3 of his goals were one-touch finishes. And I think that was just like the game plan working out. So I think it shows that he's got, sort of like principles and things he tries to do, but it's not dogmatic. I think it's willing to be pragmatic against the opponent, which you need to be able to do, I think, in this league, unless you're, Wilfried Nancy, and then you don't.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree.
I think the biggest thing, and we'll kind of keep it rolling, but the biggest thing for me was like, you got to see a lot of those guys get touches who don't normally get them, right? It's a little bit, if you're an NBA fan, it's like making sure you get your bench guys warmed up because, hey, maybe we don't need them in the second quarter, but if somebody gets hurt, late in the game, whatever, like you need somebody who can come off the bench in the fourth quarter and make a shot. So seeing Mara and Haile Selassie get 90 minutes and frankly look awesome, right? Seeing Omar Gonzalez be comfortable, and most importantly, getting Jeff Gall 90 minutes that were not, oh my God, I have, Sam Surge and Hani Mukhtar raining down on me. Like I can just kind of chill and get comfortable before I have to go play better teams. I think is the biggest plus out of that game, even more than, I mean, it was fun watching the ball go in 7 times. That was cool.
Yeah, that's always a plus.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of the ball going in the net 7 times, let's talk a little bit about the matchup at hand, right? We haven't really discussed too much. Obviously, throwing back a little bit a few weeks ago, Chicago Fire in Nashville at Geodis Park, getting the term we started using was thumped. They got absolutely thumped 7-2 against Nashville.
There's a non-radio friendly term we don't want to get this podcast listed as explicit that you can also use. But yeah,
I like
on
thumped.
the air.
I think it's good.
Thumped is good.
Yeah, we've also, but feel free to use this in your writing, in your reporting, whatever. We have coined this the United States men's national team Twitter derby. So feel free to use that later if you'd like to.
Yeah.
Round 2 here now. Round 2. Last time, Sam Surge with 4 goals. Hani Mukhtar, I wrote down 4 goals and 2 assists. There's no way that's possible.
It was a brace. It was
2-2.
They denied him his customary hat trick against the Fire, which is sort of rude. I mean, they did let someone else in, so like that was polite of the Fire, but hey.
Yeah. And Nahar with 3 assists as well. So a couple points here. First and foremost, and Tim, I'll kind of kick to you, and Ben, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. But are we looking at this as a revenge game? And kind of what's the counter to that, I guess, from the other side of the ball of how do you manage those expectations for a team who is very clearly now coming for you in terms of we can't lose like that again?
It's sort of funny, the phrase revenge game, because that's how Berhalter described the game against DC, where he said that in the team's home opener, they came out flat and didn't really deserve to get the 1 point they got, but still kind of were up ahead 2-1 in second half stoppage time and kind of got 2 points taken away from them off of an insane bicycle kick that you think, is not going to happen again from that guy. And I can't wait until tomorrow, the day that this recording comes out, to ask Greg, how he views it, because I think that there has to be, it's a opportunity for guys to show the progress that the team has made and show that like that's not who this team is, because I don't think it's really who it was before. Obviously, it was a really bad performance, and I think that the sort of like show up and prove it thing, I think, is an interesting question. I think there's a lot of guys in the squad where there are real questions about how they played in that one, and some of them just because of absences that are likely to be there, maybe getting opportunities, again, to get serious minutes and maybe have like individual revenge performances around it too.
Yeah, and then from the other side, when you're going to see a team, right? You're going to Chicago, kind of knowing that they have those expectations, that mindset. What does that kind of read like from the other side of the room there?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how Nashville approach it. I mean, BJ's always, like, you always hear coaches say like we want to win on the road, and I feel like with BJ it's a little bit more coach. It's a little bit less coach speak. I feel like he's like actually pretty bought into like the way they play and doesn't want to change that when they're on the road. And I think it's actually like against Seattle, they lost 3-0 in Seattle, and I think they maybe kind of stuck to their guns a little bit too much in the first half. So I'm interested to see how they approach it. Like winning on the road in MLS is just really hard, no matter who you're playing, but especially against a Fire team, like you guys just said. I think they're going to be extra motivated for this one, but they're also just a good team. The one thing I'm really looking out for, we've seen Nashville go direct. They did it on the road in Philadelphia, and I think honestly, they went really direct against the Fire last time, and I think a lot of that was Jacob Schaffelberg running in behind, and I think he didn't get a goal or an assist, but I thought he was maybe the most important player on the field for them. He's on international duty with Canada, so no one in MLS is like for replacement for him just because he has kind of unreal speed. So I don't necessarily think they have a kind of field stretching option. But I think they are going to still try to go direct, especially since I think the Fire tend to play a fairly aggressive back line. So, yeah, I think they'll still kind of be looking for those runs in behind and trying to play over the top. I just don't necessarily know who's going to be making those runs.
Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, it's an interesting thought, right? Because we do have multiple players kind of expected to be out in this game. Christopher Brady, Walker Zimmerman, both serving for the U.S. men's national team. Jacob Schaffelberg with Canada. As far as I'm aware, Andy Nahar still with Honduras.
He's actually going to be
Had
back. He
Oh,
only
okay.
went with them for the two qualifiers, but I don't believe he's
Mm,
playing in the Gold Cup with them. So he should be back, but I don't. I mean, he just played 2 games, so I'm not totally sure what kind of shape he's coming back in.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's the
Obviously,
same thing where there's a lot of youth national team players that were out with for the Fire and like coming from across oceans in some cases. Time difference in 2 games. I mean, being young helps with recovery, but it's not everything.
Yeah,
you mean to tell me those 20-year-olds aren't going to be ready to roll, Tim? We need Sergio Orhel in the midfield. Darn it. Um, no, but it does raise kind of an interesting point, right? Like you just talked about the importance of Jake Schaffelberg. Obviously, we talked a little bit about how they've kind of withstood Walker Zimmerman, although I know Jason Palacios was with Colombia. I don't know if he's still with Colombia or how long he'll be with the international team. Could be wrong. Maybe he's back.
as far
Um,
as I know, he wasn't called up,
oh,
but I could
I
be
thought I
wrong
already
there.
was. Then I was just wrong. No worries. That's my poor planning. No, but kind of just an interesting perspective of both sides kind of missing important players. Not Philip, excuse me, Hugo Kuipers still questionable with the injury from that he sustained last week. Romani Kawame in the same boat as well. Um, so kind of curious for, I guess, the guys who don't necessarily know all of the back end of the Nashville SC roster, right? Kind of who fills those spaces and how you think that affects the lineup and how they're going to play against this Chicago Fire side. I know Tim and I have talked a lot about Andrew Gutman's defensive development as the year's gone on, right? Kind of seen as a liability in some cases. And over the course of the year, his actual kind of advanced metrics in terms of breaking up play, stopping transitions have improved greatly, especially since that Nashville game, candidly, after he got kind of picked apart by Andy Nahar for a good chunk of that game. Kind of how, so I guess curious on your thoughts on how that'll kind of play out as guys work their way back in.
Yeah, I kind of expect that he's going to be going up against Johnny Perez with Schaffelberg out, and I think he's a very, very different type of player, but he's also maybe kind of the best, just like 1v1 dribbler that Nashville have on the roster. And he doesn't have the same pace that Schaffelberg has, but he can get in behind. Um, so that's kind of honestly before we even brought it up, that's kind of like the big matchup that I'm watching because I think that's kind of where Nashville killed Chicago in the first game was down. Nashville's right, Chicago's left. And I think I would imagine they still try to target that side heavily, especially because Hani Mokhtar kind of shifts. He shades over to the right side anyway. So I think they'll probably look to get him and Johnny Perez kind of linking up and hopefully trying to draw Gutman forward and kind of get into that space behind. But it's not going to be a like for like kind of approach as we saw last time.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the interesting questions is it's some of the lineup choices for the Fire because Gutman is locked in on that left side. Like if he's available, he will go as many minutes as Greg Berhalter can get out of him just because of how good he's been this year. On the other side, the Fire have been playing Jonathan Dean, who's a guy that came a couple years ago from USL and has really like played up a level like every opportunity he's gotten and has looked good and I think started to show more to his game than we thought existed. And like that has just been like his story, I think, throughout his career. But is still not a guy that gives as much going forward as like Leonardo Barroso, who's was out with an injury for a while and then hasn't really he's been like an off the bench sub guy since. And I think that the question is like, against Nashville, even without Zimmerman, like you still have a team that is really solid defensively. And like, do you look to get additional offensive spark, knowing that like Leo Barroso's kind of shown what you expect from like a U22 signing in their first year in MLS, where like sometimes the defensive presence is there and he can make some good plays, and sometimes it isn't. And I think that's going to be an interesting choice on Berhalter or on Berhalter's part. I also am kind of curious about if I'm assuming that we'll see Brian Gutierrez back in the starting 11 after kind of being put in the doghouse for at least a half in the last one. But what kind of performance the Fire will get out of him because he did not have a good game against Nashville last time. He was fine, I think, at a point when he went on when the team was up 4-0 at half. So like it's hard to sort of like judge that much about a performance at that stage of a game. But obviously I think still has to sort of prove what he can do, and including defensively if he's playing in the midfield the way that, Berhalter has wanted to play him this year, where it's sort of more like a kind of free eight rather than just like a clearly, attacking midfielder in a 4-2-3-1. And he can be like, he's got the skills and technical ability to have really big games. I'm just curious to see, like, this is a game where you want it to be a game where like everyone stops and looks and thinks about, Brian Gutierrez a few times, and not because he's getting carded. We haven't, I think, seen that enough from him this season or like throughout his, 5 years with a first team contract. But this would be one of those games where he can show that he can do it. I'm just curious if that's the Brian Gutierrez that sort of shows up.
Yeah, you want them to be excited because he's playing well, not because he's elbowing guys in the head for what would be the third time this year, right? We'll cross our fingers on that, I suppose. Yeah, Ben, I think to your point, was super. Yeah, I've spoken a lot about Andrew Gutman's lack of defensive prowess, right, for lack of a better word. So to hear that the guy coming on for Jacob Schaffelberg is going to be very much for lack of a better word, like a maestro with the ball at his feet, right? Good in one-on-ones. Does not make me feel great about that. And to tie it back up with what you said, Tim, that is very much how do you bench Marin Haile Selassie after the game he had? But also in a game like that, are you going to ask Jack Elliott to cover 3/4 of the back line instead of just half of it? Maybe that makes more sense for a Kellen Acosta, Mauricio Pineda pairing with Philip Zinkernagel up front. That would be where my head is. But hey, what do I know?
And I think Kellen Acosta is another one of those guys where there's a big question mark. He did not have a good game against Nashville last time, and that was, after that, he spent less time playing for the Fire in league games. Like he played in the Open Cup games and stuff like that. Kind of worked his way back in last time and started. But like, this is obviously a bigger test than DC was in terms of, and it wasn't a bounce back first half of the season after a disappointing 2024 for him. But if he wants to make it a bounce back like second half of the season, like this would be a great time for him to show up and start doing that.
You hear that, everybody? Tim is calling for a Kellen Acosta hat trick. That's huge. Love it. Love to see it. Fellas, any last actually before I even say that, we have one very important thing that we haven't done yet, and that is I get to ask you. Ben, I'm going to start with you on this one. Who you got?
Man, I could see both sides running away with this. Like, so I'm just going to go a good old fashioned 2-2 draw.
Nice.
Entirely valid. You want to throw a goal scorer on there? No pressure. You don't have to. Guests don't need to.
I'm going to say Hani with 2 because I feel like for whatever reason he loves playing against the Fire.
That's just rude. All right, Tim. Who you got?
I was actually thinking 2-2 draw in my head as well, just because it seems like this game could be explosive in either way, and so the like logic behind MLS is that like somehow that means that it won't be, and it'll end up being something completely different, not what you expect. So yeah, I'm thinking 2-2 draw. I think, I think Hani will get 1. I don't know if he will get 2. So I think it's like going to be one of those games where like some guy that gets 2 goals a year gets the second one. And I think the same thing could be true for the Fire. I'm hoping Jonathan Bamba gets 1. You know what? Like this could be a game where we get like a random, like Andrew Gutman from distance, shot that actually makes it in the back of a net thing rather than a why is he shooting from there and missing the net performance. Cause like, I feel like he's done so much, but that's one thing that hasn't showed up. And like sooner or later, if you shoot a 0.02 XG shot 50 times, you got a good chance of one of those going in. So
yeah, a little more Gutman, a little less Gaston, right? That's what we're kind of hoping for there. I was also going to say a draw. Now I feel like I can't because you guys both said a draw. So I'm going to say a 3-1 Fire win because what would I be if not a little bit of a meatball? I do think there's an aspect of like maybe you just want it more, right? I think if these two teams faced off like 10 times, it would probably right now be like 6-4, 7-3 Nashville, right? Just purely based on where the rosters are at. But on any given day, I think either side could win. And it'll also depend, I suppose, on is Hugo Kuipers available? Is Brian Gutierrez starting? Is Martin Selassie starting? But yeah, I'll say Fire 3-1. I'll go Zinkernagel, and I'll say Kuipers is starting and he scores twice. And we'll say a 4th straight game with a Jonathan Dean assist. That's what I need.
There you go.
Love that. Fellas, anything else we want to chat about before we wrap up? Otherwise, we'll get a roll. Awesome. Wonderful. As always, I would say keep an eye out. We've got our recaps coming Sunday. Thank you so much again, Ben, for joining us. Do you want to let people know kind of where to find you and what the best routes are for that?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun chatting with you guys. You can find I post most of my stuff on socials. Ben Wright on Twitter and Blue Sky. All of our Nashville stuff is at 615soccer.com. You got to spell it all out. But yeah, we launched in January and still kind of getting things up and running, but we're having a ton of fun doing it. And then I do, like you mentioned, just some kind of league-wide stuff over at Backfield where Joe Lowry continues to absolutely crush everything he does.
Yeah, absolutely. So next time you want to learn a little bit more about Nashville soccer, or for some reason you're a Nashville fan listening to this pod, go ahead, give 615 a shout, give Ben a follow. Wonderful people. It's a pleasure to have you, my man. As always, give us a follow on social media because we would like that as well. It's at Men in Red 97 anywhere and everywhere that you consume social content. Wherever you're listening to this, if you can like, rate, subscribe, follow, as Tim would say, smash that subscribe button. That's what we need. It helps grow the pod, helps grow the community. If you want to see your local team succeed, that's the best way to do it. And as always, keep tuned to the website, meninred97.com. That's where you'll find all the updates from Tim, from Alex, from Max, occasionally from me as well, where you can learn more about the team. It's where the most up-to-date stuff is, including all the roster trackers and stuff like that. And other than that, thank you so much for being here. This is the whole reason we get to do it, and we appreciate you listening. We'll be back on Sunday to recap what is hopefully a Chicago Fire victory. And until then, thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. And come on, you Men in Red.